Hello, everybody. This is the usual weekly Gateway API meeting. Today is August 13th. And yeah, this meeting is, as always, under the CNCF Code of Conduct. So please be nice to each other. I don't know if there are some new faces here. If you want to introduce yourself, yeah, it would be great. It would be great. Otherwise, we can go ahead with the agenda. Okay, let's move ahead. Um, first of all, I think this is from you, Rob, the V1.2 discussion.
Yeah, I mean anyone can cover it. But yeah, I mentioned this in Slack. We're at the API refinement phase, which we ended up talking. So just if you move up a bit to phase 3, this basically means that by the end of this phase, we're aiming to have APIs merged and documentation ready to go, not merged because we don't have. But ideally, there's a docs PR that's somewhere. Would love to have version docs, but that's for another day, I suppose. So yeah, those are the things we're aiming for. I checked in with each owner of an enhancement, or I hope I did, for the 1.2 release. If this does not work out for you, please let us know ASAP. But otherwise, it's the same thing. If your gap of choice does not make it in this timeline, then it'll just be dropped for the next release. And then again, for review and release candidates, that's the final stage. So what that means is if we're targeting August 28 for the end of API refinement and docs, that gives us 2 to 4 weeks to do release candidates and final higher level review. So we're looking at release candidates early September and final release sometime in mid-September.
Yeah.
Any comments, questions, concerns on that one?
Version docs would be great.
Yes, 100%.
Also,
I guess
Mattia, could you make your window narrower so that that'll be a lot easier to read?
Oh, yeah, sure. Is it better?
Keep going.
That works too. Great. The other thing I should mention is KubeCon. I think some folks probably got notifications about KubeCon talks getting in, and that's a good reminder that KubeCon is coming up. So yay! I will be there. I hope some of you will also be there. The past few KubeCons, we've generally tried to have Gateway meetups daily, basically, and I think that's been pretty good. For no one can ever make it to every single one, but yeah, hopefully we can recreate that this time around. If anyone has ideas for what else we can do, I'm just looking forward to catching up with people. And I've got some ideas for, larger topics that we've struggled to get through async, online. If we happen to be there in person together, it can be great to help kind of push through ideas a little more quickly that we've struggled to do online. So yeah, that's KubeCon. I got a glimpse at the schedule, and it looks like we have more Gateway-related talks at this KubeCon than any other KubeCon. So congrats, everyone. And if you didn't make it in, that's probably a good sign that there's interest in Gateway talks next time around. And yeah, okay. I guess the next one is also me. Wow, okay.
Agenda hog.
Yeah, I know, right? I've been talking with some of the other maintainers here. If you jump into versioning that link, Mattia, for those that may remember, to graduate to standard channel, we require a whole lot of things, including full conformance tests, multiple conformant implementations. I'm suggesting that we keep every ounce of that with one caveat that if we deem a feature in the extra small, tiny category, and I think we have a couple of those in this release cycle, that we can skip on the 6 months of soak time, which basically means instead of letting it soak for 2 releases, we could let it soak for 1 release. And the enhancements I had in mind were particularly the route rule names, and then the percentage-based request mirroring, which are both among the tiniest features. I'm not saying they will meet every other graduation criteria in time, but if they did, I am interested in, oh yeah, supported features, maybe. So we need to have some really good, if we're open to this, we need to have some really good guidelines on what is small enough to lapse this. So that's, opening a door that could be a slippery slope. But I do think there are some clear examples, and the rest is less clear to me. I do want to leave this soak time requirement in for anything that has a substantial, significant API surface, or we think there's possibilities of change given usage. But yeah, open to ideas and discussion on that. I keep on hearing, and I think it's good feedback, that velocity is not where we want it to be. And one way to do that, to help with that, is to provide a faster path that doesn't require quite as much soak time when we don't think we need it.
My opinion is pretty straightforward. I'm okay with this, although I think that we should try it for a couple of releases at it has to be a unanimous decision. I don't know, maybe. I kind of think a unanimous decision would be the way to start, and then if later we're like, no, we need to vote on this because I think that'd be a good way to start. The one thing that would give me some pause, the only thing that gives me pause here, is that right now we say multiple conformant implementations. I think we colloquially say 3. We just need to be very clear. I think for something to graduate in 3 months or 4, to graduate that quickly, it should have 3. I think not just 2 conformant implementations.
At least.
Yeah, I think any update to this graduation criteria should replace multiple with 3+ to make that less vague. I completely agree.
Cool.
And I would say every other bit of this should stay the same. And cool. I like the idea of requiring unanimous. Well,
I just think for a time, right? Just say it's for the first pass at this, let's just say we have to be unanimous, because who knows when one person is going to just have an inclination that saves us.
Is there?
I don't know. I'm flexible on this, but my inclination is let's just say that all maintainers have to be unanimous for the first.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Next is who is in that unanimous circle, because if anyone ever, then anyone could slow us down potentially.
We'd certainly listen to other people's warnings.
Yes, 100%.
Rob, I'd be inclined to agree with Shane on this one and say no. Start by requiring unanimous 100%, nothing else, because if you can't get the maintainers to all agree that a given thing is small, it's probably not small.
I agree.
Yeah, honestly, the route naming thing, I'm not entirely clear that I would call that one even as small, because that has an awful lot of interesting implications for the API over the future, right? Whereas percentage-based mirroring, yeah, sure, why not? That's small. Go ahead, bring it on in. Bring it on. Sure. But the route names, I don't know. And Lior, supported features, 100%.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Cool. Mike.
Yeah, I guess I just want to, I feel like kind of what's behind the motivation here on perception of lack of velocity is the experimental channel is not working as well as we would have hoped. That's kind of my theory, is that because CRDs are hard and implementations are concerned about not properly supporting or having a good graceful transition period for users of experimental CRDs, that implementations are hesitant to then support experimental CRDs, which leads to the perception of until it's in standard, it's not usable, which motivates shrinking the window for pushing things to standard. Is that entirely off base, or do other folks kind of share that perception?
That resonates with me.
I
I mean, that's why we
I-
got rid of beta too. Same reason.
Yeah. I think
I-
there's some nuance that we could discuss there, but overall, I would tend to agree. Yeah. It's
Yeah, and I would go, it's not necessarily that it wasn't working as intended for me. It's just, yeah, I'll say there are many flaws and I have things that I would like to do that are unpopular. But well, that's another rabbit hole. But what I would say is I hope that we're getting to a place where most users don't need to rely on using experimental channel, because the transition from experimental, like the experimental channel in and of itself is a very risky place to be relying on things in production. And I would rather, as much as I love to see implementation supporting experimental channel because it's how we can iterate successfully as a project, I hope that it's a minority of users going forward. So that's all. I think Mark, you're up next.
Mark.
I was going to say it might bear pointing out that size of change doesn't necessarily correlate to potential impact. I would almost vote to not have that. I don't know if I get a vote, but basically the soak time is kind of set up to guard against something where it's like, yeah, we changed this one thing, we didn't think anything bad would happen, and then it snowballed. Right. And that seems like a reasonable time frame to find out if a small change could potentially have knock-on effects that we didn't predict or couldn't be predicted, so on and so forth. So not necessarily for or against, but
Yeah.
I think
Ju-
Yeah, no,
snowball
I
could
mean,
be
I-
sort of metaphorical too, right? Where, I'll pick on percentage mirroring. It's very difficult to see that having knock-on effects on the API down the road, right?
Just to be clear, Rob, we are talking about not removing the sock time at all. We are just talking about decreasing in size. So from 6 months to 3 months, right?
Yeah.
Leor's had his hand up for a minute.
Yeah. On the experimental note, I think like that we should be investing some resources, time, brainstorming to do to think about how, I think it's one of the most important thing is to make sure the experimental channel and the experimental life cycle is properly configured, maintained, because otherwise we'll turn into a project if we're hoping the minority of the users using experimental, so then why would an implementation implement a feature that is experimental if their users are barely implemented? And then we'll get into the project into a phase where not a lot of the velocity is slow, and then we'll come back to the cycle where implementation is going back to proprietary APIs, and we just shoot ourselves in the leg. So I think we do need to spend a lot of time understanding how we're making experimental, how encourage implementing experimental, because that's the only way to leave innovation and kind of velocity.
I hear you. I think given, I don't know, it sounds like we have two things going on. We have people are worried about, does experimental work, which is part of why we're saying we might have a fast track path for small things. But I think we could spend the entire meeting discussing that. And so maybe it would be good to take this async, both of these points async. If nobody's strictly opposed to having a fast path for small things, maybe we should start making that an actual proposal. And then maybe there's a bigger conversation to be had, maybe asynchronously, just to try to see how we can make our pipeline smoother in general, which is a much bigger, grander problem to solve.
And that might
I was gonna say, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just that might entail upstream Kubernetes things, not just gateway API things, or how do we make CRDs better?
Yeah.
There are a couple hands,
And there's
and
not necessarily. Yeah, sorry.
I think Mark, you're next up.
I was just gonna ask a clarifying question. Is there any guarantee of the experimental channel being a superset of standard or non-experimental? And so
it is always a superset. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I mean that at least alleviates some of the concerns around that as far as like uptake goes, where if the amount of work to support experimental is relatively minor by comparison to standard, that might alleviate.
Yeah. Flynn, I think you're.
The one thing that I was going to toss out about experimental versus standard is that this is mostly a thing to toss out so that we can all be thinking on it before we start the conversation there, right? Experimental benefits Gateway API, the project. It does not benefit the people who are trying to use it because they have to be prepared for the fact that it will pivot out from underneath them and suddenly that'll have to change the world again, right? So we're in this very weird situation right now where people who want to get things done in production can't use standard because we're still missing things that they need, which puts us in a really messy position right now. But once we figure that out, we will still end up with a case where there's this tension between it benefits us to have people implement experimental, but it doesn't necessarily benefit the users. And that's a thing that will be loads of fun to sort out.
I just like one note on that. I disagree that it doesn't benefit the users, and I disagree that like it will be unsupported underneath them, right? Like the only like say you remove the support, so you remove it in the next release. And
no, I'm talking about breaking changes in the experimental channel.
Right, but like when you break change it on the next release. You don't break in change within, like you don't cherry pick your version and break change it, right?
If you're implementing an Ingress a gateway controller or a service mesh, and you have implemented a feature in experimental, and then there is a breaking change for that feature, you are required to go change your implementation. There is no good way for you to avoid doing that.
Right, and
so
we just did,
you have to do work at the whim of Gateway API. It's a
No,
huge win for Gateway API.
No, I'm saying like, right, we just did it. But what I'm saying is like, you will break change it in the next release, and then the API would break change in the next release, and then you will in your next release as the implementer will change it then. And then we cannot, like we can trying to fulfill the Kubernetes dream and like all the API dreams, no breaking change forever, but it's a large cost, so we need to kind of decide it. And as a user, I mean, I ran production systems on when Argo came out first, and we ran on alpha for, I don't know, a few years. And I think like we cannot speak for like maybe we have a lot of large customers who will never use experimental changes or SCRDs, but like there are many users out there who do want experimental changes on just use alpha versions and trying and experiment with things that give them flexibility that standard doesn't have.
Sounds like a great one to pick up there offline or however we do it. Because, yeah, we could easily consume the rest of this meeting for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was going to say I'd create an issue, but given that the PR would be 2 lines, basically, I think I will start with a PR and, leave it draft, hold, whatever, until we get some consensus there. Or if we don't, that's fine too.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's soak a PR
for
this, for the 3-month thing. And then if anybody feels so inclined to create a GitHub discussion talking about everything else, I think that would be potentially good. It will just take time. That will not be a quick discussion.
The real question is whether Rob's PR is going to have to soak for 3 months.
Perfect.
Nice.
Yeah.
Got him.
Shay, you want to get rid of TCP and UDP routes?
No, don't want to get rid of them. To be very, very clear about this. This is something we talked about months ago, and we're just going to probably start doing it, which is there has not been motion on TCP route and UDP route. I have personally kind of tried to be the TCP route, UDP route person, but even I don't have strong use cases enough to push them forward. So we have some tests and stuff like that, but people just haven't come to the table. So these APIs will not go away. We are not going to delete them. But at this point, we continue to be in that position. So we are going to probably close the issues for them for now. They can be reopened if there's a resurgence, or if you really feel strongly about these right now and feel like, oh, well, I want to come be the champion of TCP and UDP route, we would love that. This won't happen fast or anything. This spinning down of, when we say spinning down, literally like just there's not any traction going, but we're tracking them as if they're real GEPs, but they're not, because nobody's moving them forward. So this is a call out to anybody who really wants to see TCP route and or UDP route to move forward. Now is the time to really start jumping in there and saying so, and being willing to put some time in. We will, but I also personally can support you in that. So please feel free to reach out to me.
One note on that, there's some overlap with Candace's item a bit further down about gateway hierarchy, in the sense that gateways already provide some basic L4 routing capabilities. That's a very controversial thing that a lot of people don't like. But if you don't like that and you are in favor of TCP route or UDP route, that's a good argument to push those forward.
We need your voice.
Anyway,
this was kind of frustrating because I ran into a use case for TCP route last month that I had to jump through some hoops to try to sort out what to do. And I have absolutely no bandwidth to try to champion that right now. So,
yeah.
It's not like dead forever. We're just trying to let people know if it's a signal we're sending that it's just, we're trying to make the reality be reflected in the issues. So
makes sense.
Shane, would frozen be better verbiage than spinning down? Just for clarity.
Feel free to change that actually in the doc, or I can real quick. So yeah, frozen. And then the next thing, this has been an ongoing conversation. There are those of us, and I don't think anybody's like strictly saying, no, I think you're wrong, that have had conversations about Gateway API went GA. It's a great API. It has some difficulties when it comes to the developer persona. We didn't quite hit the mark with the developer persona.
That's remarkably politic of you to phrase it that way, Shane.
I mean, if you want to raise your hand and then just go at it with frothing mouth, you can. But
I'm pretty confident my opinion on this is well known at this point. So,
but
I'm delighted to see this item.
I think that it's an accurate statement to say that we just didn't quite hit the mark with the developer persona, even though that was kind of our initial intention. This is a call out to people to, Flynn is changing my thing to Anna, the app developer, because we use that's one of the named personas. If you're not familiar, Anna, the app developer. Go ahead and rattle off the rest of them real quick, Flynn.
Anna's the app developer. Chihiro is the cluster operator / cluster provider, and Ian is the infrastructure provider. I might get this wrong, but
Roger that.
Ian would be the one who is providing hardware upon which Chihiro will get a cluster set up and operating, and Anna is the one who's trying to actually get things done for real people in the real world on the cluster.
Roger that. And since we are focused on role orientation, which is something that Ingress didn't really do, it's important. And maybe I wouldn't argue necessarily strongly, but you might think the app developer might be the most important role, right?
So I would argue that strongly even.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has a role, but I think it's fair to say at the end of the day, none of it else matters without the app developer. So they are the most important role. So basically there's just an ongoing conversation about this. And I wanted to reiterate that for anybody else who wasn't like super clear on that, but more specifically want feedback. Now is as good a time as any that if you see this, like with your users, and maybe you don't see this, and maybe you can go talk to your users about it, now would be a great time to start putting in some issues focused on kind of the developer workflow as it comes, the ergonomics of developing and using Gateway API from the developer persona. Because we need to make this better, and it's something that will take a lot of us coming together to do. I think in the long term, we'll need improvements to like the website and stuff like that. And actually, Mattia, Nick, Rob, and myself all kind of talked about, a revitalization of the website with a developer first focus might be a small part of this. But basically, we just want your help with making this better. So please do come forward, put in any issue or discussion that is relevant to you so that we can start on a path to making this better. Because as it currently stands, we're kind of just powering forward with features and not doing, we haven't been super focused on trying to come back around and do some UX. So
Yeah, Candace.
can't hear you,
I
Candace.
think
You're
you're
muted.
muted. Yeah.
Sorry. Would it be worthwhile for us to have a GEP that sort of defines the operations that we, that we would expect each of the roles to cover?
Maybe.
There may be some
Maybe.
overlap,
Oh, there definitely is. Sorry, there
depending
definitely
on,
is overlap.
yeah. So it may end up in our documentation as a chart of some kind, where there might be a check for Anna to be able to add route certificates, but there's a check for the cluster admin to be able to add system certificates or route certificates that for certain routes, that are more admin based routes or something.
I just pasted the link to the page that I think is the only thing in the docs that really talks about this. Does anybody remember anything beyond this?
I think this is, but it sounds like Candace is talking about something like, like
think-
specific
Yeah,
features.
I think the idea of a GEP is a good one, really.
It can't hurt. It sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't,
But-
it's going to be really potentially wide in scope, but it's certainly a starting point where we can start having a conversation and at least capturing the motivations and the problems, and not worry too much about, what we're going to do, but why we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd probably like us to start with a discussion first to just collect a lot of the details that will go into a GEP.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to recommend. Just open a discussion, complain about Gateway API here.
That's pretty much what we
Basically.
want. We want your complaints, yes, to start with.
Yeah.
We also want your ideas. And anybody who's, I'm so bad at web, but anybody who can think of ways to which make the documentation and the website are just like the first place a lot of people will show up when they're like, I need to like do HTTP route. Figuring out good ways to on-ramp them better. We would love help with that because I think a lot of us are kind of like networking folks, and like my websites, they would all be like HTML text only if given the option. So go ahead, Rob.
Boy, I had my hand up and I had a very specific thing to say, and I am
Sorry.
less and less sure what that was. That's fine.
Sorry, I knocked it out of
But
your head.
yeah,
You were
okay,
probably
yeah.
just going to go, shut up, Flynn. We don't want to hear you talk about Anna anymore. That's probably
That's
it.
right. No, a +1 on starting a discussion, and don't be shy if you don't like something about the API, drop it in there. Particularly if you think it's something that could be fixed, that would be fantastic. Or even if you're not sure it can be fixed, still better to know than not. The other thing I wanted to say is I think there has been a long-running push that hasn't been that obvious to improve UX. I do think that what is happening with Gateway Cuddle, a shout out to Garov's PR that's coming in. I'm really hopeful that we can encourage people to use Gateway Cuddle as the primary way of interacting with Gateway API in not too long. There are so many things we're struggling with right now that are just CRDs don't have these things, right? Whether it's even you think of the basic things like columns in your kubectl Git output. I sure would like to see more useful information there. And with Gateway Cuddle, we can't really with kubectl, like just basic things. Or I'm trying to use something that's not supported. That's something that we can solve with Gateway Cuddle, not with kubectl. So these are just, this has been a long running effort. I'd say Lior supported features GEP is in that same thing. So I think there are people working on this, but I would love to get more people focused on these ideas and have more efforts in this space. So yeah.
Yeah,
Flynn, you were next.
I think I was going to say that I think that the work that Rob is talking about is a great idea. I also think that I've been hearing more and more actual users say that the way they really interact with things is via Helm, which makes our lives difficult
the
for
meeting.
things like better
End the meeting.
CLI things. So yeah, it was very. I've been getting really depressed hearing things like that because I really like GW control. But okay, that was all I was going to point out. It's a
No,
hard
that's fair,
problem,
though.
really. It is.
But it's true, right? Like Helm comes up
Well-
all the time.
So, but I mean, I've used Helm in many times in past life, for better or for worse. And you use that like as part of your CI, as part of your whatever. But if you're trying to debug something or understand stuff, something, you're still using kubectl. Like it's not like.
Yeah, it's a little weird. We've run across some folks. Actually, you know what? I'll take that offline. We've run across some folks who are so hard over on the GitOps religion that it has been a really interesting point of view to hear some of these folks talk about some of these things. Shane, go ahead. I
was just gonna back up what Rob was saying. Kind of lost my thought a little bit just because it's been a minute, but I think the gist of it was I agree with what Rob is saying, and to put a finer point on what we're talking about here, it's not to say that we are not at all working on the developer persona. Some of this may in fact just be visibility and that we need to do more promotion. So like one of the things I think Mattia suggested was that like ingress to gateway and gateway cuddle should be like one of the first things you see when you come to the website. Plain and simple. You know, things.
Yeah.
Small things like that can help.
I actually used Ingress to Gateway for work the other day, so huge props for Ingress to Gateway. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
How was it, the experience?
Oh, Lynn, I expected to hear a lot of feedback. What do you like?
Yeah, indeed.
I will point you to the article in which I point people to using it. It boils down to, hey, this works really well, but be aware that the things that it can't translate, it just silently ignores. So check carefully.
Oh no, but like we have the GSOC Mentee just finalizing the project that I sent you the link for.
Nice. Excellent. Then I look forward to being able to update that post and tell people about it.
I hope so. Otherwise, I'll DDoS your website.
Okay.
What? Be careful. He's got like Google infrastructure behind him. That is not going to be a gentle DDoS.
I mean, you know, it would, as far as I'm concerned, it would just be an interesting example of cross-industry assistance in infrastructure debugging, or
we're just going to file it as a stress test against Cloudflare. Call it a day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they love their stress tests.
Pretty sure we used Cloudflare. Yeah, Lior, if I didn't point you to that link already, I will. Please let me know, and I will do that.
Thanks.
So yeah, I realize we are catching up time, and we do have a few more items than I realized on the agenda. The TLDR on that, if anybody's just like tuning back in, we need you, literally you, everyone in this room, to help to make the developer experience better. So please do come forward and help, and let us know how we can support you in helping us, or if we can answer questions. Last little bit, and I'll stop yapping.
Sorry, speaking of DevX, before we move off that, did the issue from the GitHub issue on the Gateway RS get brought up?
We talked about it in chat we linked it in chat at the beginning of this. If you want to put something on the agenda for it, please go ahead.
The issue for the issue.
The one about DevX and reusing types.
Oh, right.
The one that was linked was Flynn's PR, not the issue that was being discussed. I didn't phrase this correctly, is really what happened.
No, but if you want to put something on the agenda at the bottom, if we go ahead. So yeah, I'll try to make this one quick, but just a reminder, since we talked about KubeCon earlier, don't forget to register for the Contributor Summit. The Contributor Summit is my personal favorite part of going to KubeCon. All of KubeCon is great, but Contributor Summit is like, it just makes me happy. It is, if you don't know, basically a pre-conference just for those of us who are part of Kubernetes SIGs, Kubernetes org, working on Kubernetes. The people actually working on Kubernetes. Anybody If somebody needs sponsorship to get in, please do PM me. I might be able to sponsor you. I can't promise it, but I can try. For those who don't have org membership. And I wanted to make it clear that the CFP is open till September 5th, so or 15th. So if you feel like I got that date right?
Don't
Check
don't
me on
take
that,
10
but-
days off of that, man.
Yeah, I think I got that date right. Double check me, but we have a while
I'll
left.
double check.
So,
One moment.
so thank you. So don't feel like you've missed it or you don't have enough time. You should have time. The talks are so important. Like those kinds of talks can be so very important to like get things out there. And then what else did I have on my list there? Oh, the other thing that's kind of new or different than normal is this one's going to be on Monday. Normally these end up on Tuesday. I'm so happy about it. And they get collapsed on top of the co-located events. So we lose attendance sometimes because of the co-located events. But we were able to get the summit on a Monday separate from everything else. That does mean it's a day earlier. So keep that in mind with your travel. And then if you like that we finally been able to break it free from the other co-located events, please do go into the summit staff and give them a thanks. They put a lot of effort in to make that happen this time. So that's about it. Just a reminder, contributor summit.
So it's a whole week of KubeCon this year.
Yeah.
Like in the the good old days or something like that.
Yeah. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
I seriously am looking forward to having the Contrib Summit not be overlapping with the Colo events. That's going to be really nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Gateway hierarchy brainstorming, Candace.
Yeah, I've been out of the office for a couple of weeks, but I know that we left off discussing gateway hierarchy, and I wanted to know if anything happened in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks
Yeah.
regarding this. And,
Yeah, Dave.
and
Sorry, go ahead.
particularly the loss of TLS route.
Yeah, so Dave did a lot of work on the gap. He created an updated PR that was basically taking some of the ideas in this doc and trying to translate them into a gap. We had a couple rounds of review on that at least, but ultimately determined that it was just a bit too big, a bit too late to get into 1.2. So it is sitting there. I'm really hoping that we can iterate kind of out of band here. Because it is such a huge topic. I don't want to wait until, another 4-week cycle to try and fit this in. So I'm hoping that we can keep on working through this kind of as we're still doing 1.2 without the goal of getting this into 1.2. But more feedback, more reviews on this particular PR would be really helpful. But I'd say that's where this discussion has gone most recently.
Yep. I've included the PR link here in the docs. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. We can move on. LLM route. This looks fancy.
Yeah, not to.
Oh man,
I think I
Rob
mentioned.
decided to bring it up.
I think I've mentioned this to others in passing before, but at working group serving last week, we proposed a topic called dense LLM serving with inference gateway. That's the open topic down there. There's a few links. I've also linked all the docs in our agenda as well. I don't really want to go too far down this rabbit hole in this meeting, but I'll try and summarize.
Can I interrupt to ask?
Yeah.
Where in this doc do we talk about the use cases from the end user's point of view? Because if that's not in there, I do not want to go and read 4 different docs and be annoyed by the fact that they're not in there at the end. My blood pressure's high enough today.
This is a really good question. I have been in the world of like dozens of docs. I forget what was actually in this specific agenda, so I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to you.
They still
I know
using
it's been considered.
they still using I haven't read through this doc. Are they still using the Kong AI gateway as a point of reference? Is that kind of like the
Yes, but this is a different idea than what Kong it's AI gateway. My view of the world is this is something that could sit behind Kong's AI gateway.
I got
Like
you.
it's complementary, but not really overlapping.
I'll have to read
So
these.
yeah, so there's a lot here. I will try and do the very high level summary view of the world. There's a lot of diagrams. The short thing is if you're interested in this, check out working group serving. I'm trying to isolate this community for a bit while these ideas are still really fresh and new. But there is this overarching idea that if and when the working group serving comes up with an idea that they're confident with, that they're, you know, has some level of stability, then I think it would be proposed as an extension to Gateway API. And then it would come to this community when there's a bit more confidence in working group serving about what is actually happening. This specific proposal that I linked to was presented last week at the working group serving meeting. As you can see in that doc, it's kind of a combination between ByteDance and Google folks, including myself. So yeah, but definitely trying to widen the group of people that are working on this. Just heads up that this is a idea of making a Gateway API compatible extension route backend. Unclear exactly where this fits in. That makes it more efficient to route to basically LoRa or LLM endpoints.
Do you plan to present something about it at the contributor summit? I think it could be a cool topic.
That's actually a good point. I should do that. Yeah,
You
we
should
do that. Yeah.
Glancing over the text that's being on the screen, this feels like they're basically saying it's difficult to multiplex LLMs because you have to load so much crap into so much hardware. And so we want to change Gateway API to make this possible. Is that what I'm reading? What I'm summarizing here?
Kind of. Okay, so definitely not change. Definitely not change Gateway API. This is a potential extension or addition to Gateway API. This is not trying to change any aspect of the API that exists today. With that said, there's the very specific problem statement that this work is trying to solve is basically that there's this concept called LoRa that has I'm going to be awful at trying to summarize this, to be clear.
I love the way they had to reuse an algorithm that already existed.
Right. But the idea is that for the reason dense is in the name is that instead of having a separate pod per LLM or whatever, the idea is you can have a shared base model and then fairly small adapters on top that modify that model. And say each pod is capable of loading, say, 100 different adapters, but only one or two of them is loaded in memory at one point in time. You want to route intelligently based off of what you think, what the proxy knows is loaded in memory on that pod. VLLM is a very popular model server for this. There are others. Yeah, so this has a lot. This is such a new idea that I think it's going to, it's going to live in working group serving. It's going to include a reference implementation. and it's going to be Gateway API compatible and maybe eventually inside Gateway API. But for right now, it's just a project of working group serving that happens to be Gateway API compatible.
It's going to be really interesting to see, on the one hand, to really get a better sense of the use cases, and on the other hand, to see how it looks as they start coming to Gateway API with things like this, mostly from the complexity budget point of view. Where there's been talk around the maintainers that we may be approaching the complexity budget. I personally feel that we are already over the complexity budget in very, very many cases. And so my immediate reaction to this is, it feels like it should be possible to do the kind of routing that they're talking about without adding complexity on the Gateway API side. And so I'm very interested in seeing what the use cases look like and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry.
The good news is the complexity, the user-facing complexity is fairly minimal. A lot of this is really just defining patterns for how to understand what a backend, has loaded in memory, right? Like there's a lot of implementation complexity here. That's why we're trying to start with reference implementation, all this stuff. There's, I mean, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but if you're familiar with how Quadrant plugs in on top of Gateway implementations today, it's theoretically possible that this becomes an add-on to any Gateway implementation in the future. I don't know, but just, this early days, we'll see where it goes. I agree with your concerns about complexity budget, but yeah, I mean, the alternative is an entirely new API for this, which is also probably worse. So, yeah.
I mean, we're deprecating a few APIs like TCP route, so we have a room for another one.
That's right. Instead of going lower level, we'll just go higher level.
Jokes aside, I was about to make the same comment. So I think the complexity is really, like in the current proposal, it's really on the implementation side. So like from the API, I think it's relatively simple. And most of the users that I at least know that need it, like they have their use cases and they know what they need, and like an optimized routing for loads, for pods with preloaded stuff in memory. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think my main takeaway from this is just, I know we're nearing time, so I'll leave it for the next agenda item. But just if you're interested, the short answer is show up to working group serving. And if you have concerns from a Gateway API perspective, well, actually, maybe also show up to working group serving. But you feel free to ping me too. I'm happy to chat about any of this offline.
Okay. Cool. It looks like we are done. This
No, Mark
is still here.
Yep. I was going to say that one's less reusing types if you actually look at the issue, and more potentially changing some of the stuff in the CRDs. Did Shane leave us?
Shane had to leave,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Shane ran screaming into the abyss, which is unfortunate because he might be able to explain a little bit better. But basically, it's a matter of potentially altering the CRDs to make code generators spit out code that is a better developer experience, essentially. If you look at what happens in the current generation, a lot of stuff just gets like spat out as unique types. In languages like Python, that's not like a huge deal. In languages like Rust or potentially Go, it is, right?
So you're talking about things like what? Like the backend ref in an HTTP route and the backend ref in a gRPC route should be the same type, but aren't?
Correct.
So what kind of, where would we be making those modifications? Is that something like we need to do in the Go project?
Well, I think that's part of the discussion here, is do we alter the code generators to try to intelligently deal with it on their own, which seems like asking for trouble, or do we change the CRDs to have some type of hinting or something in them, and then work on changing the code generators? There is discussion here. I mean, we've got 4 minutes, so I don't want to literally just read off a page. But basically, if we could get some input and feedback from the group on this specific issue, I think that would be helpful.
Just so I understand how this is generated, is it reading from the YAML CRDs basically and translating that into Rust types, or is it translating from Go types to Rust types?
It's translating from the YAML CRDs. I really wish Shane was here because he's also the maintainer of the tool that does that. So
okay. All right.
He could keep me honest, but I'm reasonably certain.
I'm pretty sure you're correct that it has to read the YAML rather than reading the Golang.
Yeah.
I mean, you certainly could write a Go parser in Rust, but I'm not sure anybody's done that or wants to.
I don't know. That sounds really fun to me.
Well, knock yourself out. I believe that there was some discussion that throwing in some more information to the CRDs might make it more possible for that tool to do things in a sane fashion. And I think the immediate question was along the lines of, does anybody in the group think that would be a god-awful terrible idea? Or do people think that that might be something that's pursuable?
My concern is related to UX. I don't know if there's anywhere we can shove information in a CRD that isn't user-facing. So right now, like anyone using kubectl explain is going to get the description in our CRD, and I don't want to have like a bunch of, Rust type hints in there, kind of thing.
They wouldn't necessarily be Rust type hints because there's tooling for almost every language to generate some type of client, right? And that's more what we're talking about is in adding some type of metadata or something to be like, yeah, this thing is actually the same thing as that. Like, these aren't discrete types. Don't emit them as discrete types.
Your point about trying to avoid having low-level type crap appear in the appear when the user does, kubectl explain. I mean, I think that's a valid point that's worth looking at. And I think that we are going to need Shane around to really hammer on that one. So of course he had to flee screaming, naturally.
Yeah, this does sound interesting. This is not me trying to say no, it's just me trying to find a way to enable this without, putting this in the face of users, right? So if there's some way we can hide this away that is less visible, open to that. And
absolutely.
agree.
And I full disclosure, I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it. So, it's really more of a rush. Hey, this issue exists. If we could get some more input from literally everybody, literally anybody, please, input will be helpful. For, against, ideas, doesn't matter. But if everybody could take a look, that would be awesome. And that would be the action item, is everybody take a look.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we are at time. Does anyone else has something to add? Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.